Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Richard Dasher. He's a PhD from Stanford University, where he serves the role as the director of the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, and he's also the executive director at the Center for Integrated Systems and Consulting. Welcome to today's show.
Thank you very much, Alan.
So, Richard, give me some of your background. This is quite a mouthful going through the two centers over there, but how did you, let's start back, how did you come to be at Stanford?
Well, actually, it's an interesting story that I can't claim was planned. My undergraduate degree is from a music conservatory. When I was growing up, I wanted to take a big challenge that nobody knew whether I could do. I grew up in South Georgia. Went to the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, where I got my undergraduate degree. Decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more cerebral, and went to graduate school at Stanford in linguistics, where I specialized in the Japanese language. And then I decided I didn't want to be a college professor. After finishing a PhD, I went to the U.S. State Department and was in charge of the Japan and Korea training programs for American diplomats. So I spent a year doing the basic programs in Washington, and then I directed 2 field schools in Japan and Korea for American diplomats who would be assigned to those countries. After that, I decided I'd better get some business experience, so I stayed in Japan and worked for 2 companies as a board director and developed international business. And then I heard about this technology management center that was being created in the School of Engineering at Stanford, and it sounded like a really intriguing kind of proposal to help train American scientific and technical people in the skills that they would need to be successful in Japan and in East Asia and really in a global economy. So I went into the Stanford University School of Engineering in 1993 as the associate director of this technology management center, and the next year became the director of it. And we have focused a lot on Japan, but now we're looking broadly across Asia. I've also been working with CIS, which is really exploratory research into nanotechnology and other kinds of advanced electronics. So I divide my time in half, and keeps me busy.
Now, I understand you speak regularly on entrepreneurship in the U.S. and Asian markets. What are some of the recent trends that you see for the growth in these areas?
Well, entrepreneurship is a hot button in just about every economy in the world. People are seeing how entrepreneurship contributes to innovation, which contributes to continuing economic growth and also competitiveness. If you can standardize something, it will go to a cheaper place. However, innovation really does not standardize. It has to do with the combination of human creativity and risk-taking. And entrepreneurship is at the heart of taking a particular kind of risk, doing something that might transform an existing industry or change an existing kind of company practice. And so it's a topic of interest all over the place. Now, what's happening is you have quite high entrepreneurship rates in some countries. The entrepreneurship rate of people involved in entrepreneurial activities is double the United States rate in China. So China has a rate this year of about 24% of the population being involved in some kind of early stage entrepreneurship. In the U.S., it was 12%.
You know, this is interesting because I once heard somebody make the comment, and as you said earlier, if you standardize something, it can go someplace else. And they said one of the things that keeps the United States ahead of the rest of the world is their ability to innovate. And you just made a comment about all these early startups now in China, that innovation seems to be shifting over to other places.
Well, every place needs to innovate. Now, the difference between China is that they are still transitioning from kind of a less developed country into an advanced economy. Some places the wage costs are already getting pretty high, and the East Coast cities in China are getting to act a lot like advanced economies. But China has a huge set of opportunities in terms of developing tier 2 cities and even further into the interior, so that the real opportunities in China are based on getting to the market first, whereas the opportunities here really have to do with coming up with something much more creative, something much more different.
So we still are on top with the creativity and the innovation.
I think you won't find a place quite like Silicon Valley anywhere else.
Well, so when you look at the hot buttons right now for businesses here coming through Stanford, where do you see trends moving towards?
Right now, cloud computing is really a hot area. I think that energy and clean tech is probably the next wave after that. Medical areas, biomed, as the population continues to age, going to be a long-term growth play. But right now, it's cloud computing.
Visiting here today with Richard Dasher. He's the director of U.S. Asia Technology Management and also the director for the Center of Integration Systems Consulting at Stanford University. We need to take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Protecting your family's health and welfare is a sacred trust. At Greenstein Rogoff Olsen Company, we know that sound financial planning will protect them now and in the future. We're certified public accountants with tax services for the highly successful. For your business and your family, call GrowCo.
Greenstein Rogoff Olsen Company will help you manage your financial affairs so you can focus on what's really important in life.
GrowCo, helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. I'm here today visiting with Richard Dasher. He's a consulting professor at Stanford University. And Richard, before the break, we're talking about the trends that were coming up. And you're primarily specializing in the Asian markets.
That's correct, but anything that connects U.S. and Asia, because a lot of the new business really requires cross-border thinking from the beginning.
Now, let me ask this question. So I'm in some little venture funds, and some of them, they've taken like 8 companies public in China. And clearly there's cultural differences between how one country thinks versus the other. And so we solve that by when we put money over there, we ask this is going back to China, we say, well, okay, this is the U.S. money, this is the China money.
Yeah.
And the U.S. money, you have to follow our rules, and for every dollar you invest, we'll invest side by side. And they have a standard way of doing business with government officials and stuff that does not meet the standard of this country. How do you deal with that in the scheme of when you look at cross the border and acclimating between cultures?
Well, this is one way in which business is much more complicated if you do it on an international scale. So one of the main things about doing business in China is to know who you're dealing with. And so I'm on the advisory board for a small company that's doing due diligence consulting for potential investors in China. And I think probably the majority of what this company does is look into the backgrounds of the managers of the companies to find out who they're connected to and what's likely to be motivating them. That's one area. Your approach to using the funds from the U.S. in a kind of different way to using the funds in China is certainly the way that a lot of companies have managed to be successful there. A lot of times that involves an offshore company, someplace like the Cayman Islands, for the American money, the U.S. money to go into. And then there will be an operating contract with a domestic entity in China. One of the other issues in China is that the regulatory framework is extremely complex and in some ways contradictory. And this is one reason close personal ties to people in the government are so widespread among companies in China. It's really a way of hedging risk because that gives you a kind of insight into how the regulations are going to be implemented. This is, it's complex, but the opportunities are so big that people really can't just sit aside and let them go their separate way.
So I read recently that China wanted to remake the banking industry and make it a little bit more looser with, more capital markets. So are they going to succeed at that, make that transition?
I wouldn't expect that to happen anytime soon. I think that they're more likely to come closer to the standards that are in the rest of the world. In fact, we're starting to see a few of the successful new Chinese companies that are really starting to play like multinationals and really follow the accepted rules worldwide more than they did. And I think that the growth you see in companies like Huawei Technologies or Lenovo, these are both companies that are really trying very hard to be Western in the way they approach things.
You know, it seems that that the world, in essence, is growing a lot smaller. Is the credit markets affecting the trade internationally? And let me ask, I heard Meg Whitman speak recently, and Meg, when she got up, she was talking about, we manufacture in China, we got a cheap labor rate, but the logistics to get the product over here are tremendously expensive.
Yeah.
And so what do you think about the trend? Do you see that continuing on?
Well, I think the logistics is one of the main reasons that have enabled global business. When you think about the tens of thousands of miles that every part if you look at a computer or you look at a digital camera, the insides of that thing have traveled for a total mileage of probably halfway to the moon. And to be able to do that with a low-cost basis is absolutely critical. Now, the supply of money is an important point, and I do think that you're seeing capital markets really grow at a rapid rate in Asia, throughout Asia.
I'm visiting here today with Richard Dasher from Stanford University on entrepreneurship. We'll be right back after these messages.
Nothing's more important than spending time with your family. At Greenstone Rogoff Olsen Company, we're trusted advisors to the highly successful. Our goal is to help you find the right strategy to protect your wealth for yourself and those you love. Kids! Why do I feel like I've just had an audit? As trusted advisors to the highly successful, we'll make sure that you don't lose your shirt.
Roco helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Richard Dasher at Stanford University. He's a PhD, and he's involved in the entrepreneurship program over there and also U.S.-China relations. And before the break, we're talking about doing business in China. Richard, from your research, what do you see the number one concern you would have about what's happening in China?
There are several concerns about China. One is political stability. I think that I do hear a lot of people in China who are kind of not real happy with the current situation. But I think probably in terms of capital and the flow of money, the biggest thing is whether China is going to go through a stage where it copies Japan and South Korea by having a set of large companies that have an inordinate amount of power in the national economy. So capital is too highly concentrated in the big business groups in Japan and in Korea, and they've had a real hard time getting away from that model and freeing up capital to go after really new ideas that aren't already in somebody's back pocket, as it were. China may have a tendency to create similar big businesses and go after the kind of short-term stability that comes from picking winners and having a few big companies that are flagships for the entire nation. I'm concerned that that will eventually diminish the quality of entrepreneurship in China. Right now, entrepreneurship in China is equally driven between a sense of necessity and a sense of opportunity. And the opportunity-driven entrepreneurship is really what makes an advanced economy strong. Necessity means you're an entrepreneur because you couldn't get a job anywhere else. And so to move into this area where you have opportunity, you really need the best people going after the best ideas and getting the right kind of help in order to be successful. So if the best people are siphoned off because they don't see opportunity for themselves outside the context of a big company, then you really have an inflexibility in the labor market, and certainly capital follows the ideas and the people around. That becomes inflexible, and it's really hard to change the entire system all at once. That's what Japan and Korea have been trying to do for the last 15 years or so. And they've had limited success, but there's still a sense that if you're really up at the top, you're going to wind up working for a big company.
You know, I heard, I have a perception with China that big companies that have gone over in the past have found their products to be reverse engineered. Is the trend still there, or do you see that they're taking responsibility in patent protection?
This is one of the cultural things about China. It's not so much patent protection. The laws in China have improved a lot. The execution, the implementation of the laws is not quite as far along. And I think that you also see that just in terms of general attitudes toward competition. In the U.S., typically you have an early stage industry with an almost chaotic situation with a lot of different companies coming up with different kinds of things. Then as a few of the companies become dominant, people naturally look for related but new ideas that are a little different. You see this in the cloud computing area right now. After Facebook and Twitter have come onto the stage, you're not going to have exactly the same kind of social network platform that they're doing. In contrast, in China, as a company becomes more successful, and I'm thinking about Tencent, which was one of the companies that is involved in instant messaging and involved in a wide range of different kind of online community activities, their success continues to breed competitors, so that you have 30 companies this year that are competing directly in the same kind of area. That sort of chaotic situation is kind of an indication that intellectual property is less seen as an asset that is protectable.
You know, last weekend I spent with Mitt Romney up in Park City, and one of the countries that he mentioned from the podium was Vietnam. He said, 30 years ago, who would have ever thought that Vietnam would be the economic, emerging economic nation that it is today? Comment?
Vietnam's a really interesting place. Just like China, it's got a government that's very much in control. However, unlike China, Vietnam is relatively straightforward in terms of what the government structure is. In China, you have competing regions and competing city governments and different levels of the government structure that make for a very complex regime and make it very hard to do business there. The American Chamber of Commerce said that the most difficult thing, American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, said that the most difficult problem for American businesses in China were contradictory regulations.
Really?
So Vietnam is kind of monolithic, and they've used that very well. They've got 90 million people. They are developing an education system. They're coming from way behind. The labor cost is lower than China now. But except for not having as big a market as China, they have really strong possibilities for becoming a place where you'll see a lot of new business.
Do you still see this strong trend in outsourcing of labor? What about the jobs in America? I read something in Michigan about now we're going to produce a television set. It was like a big win for the USA. What's your take on the outsourcing of jobs into the future?
Well, that is a problem that goes beyond economics, because our leaders really do need to look at what's good for the maximum number of people possible. But there's a natural outflow of lower-end jobs out of an advanced economy and into a cheaper economy. And no matter what economy you're in, there's probably always going to be someplace cheaper. That means that it will be difficult to keep jobs like high school educated, very high paying line manufacturing jobs in the U.S. unless there's some sort of innovation or some sort of special skill that's involved in that position.
So trends for the future. Google came out with Google Glasses today. What do you think about this Star Trek type technology?
Well, I see a generation gap, and unfortunately, I have too many gray hairs to really appreciate just the full potential of Google Glasses. I have a feeling that my 26-year-old daughter would be a much quicker person to see exactly what she could do and feel much more comfortable using these things. To me, it'd drive me crazy to have all this, text information coming out of one of the eyeglasses. But I think that this is a great indication of how a big company can stay innovative. Google is a very large company, and Google has all sorts of projects going on internally. I also saw a project this morning that they're doing development of an autopilot automobile. And so to be involved in that kind of thing has a wonderful sort of morale effect on everybody associated there, as well as, being part of the pipeline of creating new business.
I'm visiting here today with Richard Dasher. He's a professor, PhD from Stanford University. And Richard, appreciate you being on today's show.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to American Dreams with Alan Olsen on AM 1220 KDOW.